don't fill your plate. You didn't pay for this. My older sister's voice, Chloe, cut through the elegant murmur of the dinner party like a knife, loud enough for every relative at my parents' celebration to hear. A few forks froze midair, suspended over expensive porcelain. My mother, Helen, glanced at me, then offered a small, dismissive smile, as if the insult were nothing more than harmless banter. Real family comes first, she said, turning back to Chloe, completely ignoring the stunned silence that had fallen over the table. I had spent 3 weeks of my life meticulously arranging this dinner. I had approved every single menu change, personally signed every contract, and placed my own credit card on the reservation for the entire event. But no one at this table knew, because I hadn't wanted it to feel like a transaction. I wanted it to be a gift, a genuine expression of love, not some grand performance. Chloe, though, she believed my silence made me powerless. She leaned back in her chair, a smirk playing on her lips, that familiar, satisfied expression she always wore when she thought she had successfully put me in my place. I looked down at the untouched food on my plate, then slowly, deliberately, around the table at the faces waiting to see if I would defend myself. For years, I had explained. I had forgiven. I had paid. And I had done it all without ever asking for a shred of credit. But that night, as I sat there, feeling the weight of their judgment and my sister's malice, I understood something with chilling clarity. Another explanation from me would only give them a fresh opportunity to dismiss me, to brush me aside, to make me disappear. So I nodded. I carefully folded my linen napkin, placing it beside my plate. I stood, slowly, deliberately, then put on my bright red coat and walked out. The polished marble of the lobby felt colder than usual under my feet. At the reception desk, I found Matthew, the calm and incredibly patient event coordinator. "Has the final charge been processed?" I asked him, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. He shook his head. "Not yet, Miss Thorne. The authorization converts after dessert." I looked him straight in the eye. "Remove my card from the folio." Matthew hesitated, his brow furrowing slightly. "Ms. Thorne, the room deposit is non-refundable. The remaining balance would become due immediately from the party. A non-refundable deposit of 2,000 credits. That was a lot to walk away from. But the humiliation I just endured? That was priceless. "I understand," I told him, my voice firm. "Please, keep the deposit. Consider it the price of learning." He studied my face, then asked, "Would you like me to tell them there's been a payment issue?" "No," I replied, a new resolve hardening my tone. "Tell them the truth. Tell them the woman in the red coat canceled the reservation payment and asked you to deliver the bill." Matthew nodded, a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps surprise, perhaps understanding. I turned toward the valet desk, but before I reached the main doors, I heard my father, Robert, call my name from the dining room. I turned back. Through the shimmering glass doors, I watched as Matthew walked to our table and placed a black leather folio beside Chloe's plate. Her triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a look of bewildered confusion. Helen leaned toward him, mouthing a question. I saw Matthew repeat the sentence, exactly as I had requested. Even from the lobby, I could see the color drain from their faces. Chloe opened the folio, her eyes scanning the total, before she snapped it shut with a loud, definitive click. Robert pushed his chair back and hurried toward me. "Isabella, what did you do?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. Not, "What did they say to you?" Not, "Why did you leave?" But, "What did you do?" I looked past him, back at the table. "I stopped paying for a dinner I was just told I had not contributed to." He lowered his voice further, as if trying to hide the urgency from the others. "But this is your mother's birthday." "It was also my gift," I countered, my voice unwavering. Chloe rejected that gift in front of everyone. "I'm simply respecting her decision." Behind him, Chloe stood up, waving the bill like a flag of surrender. "This is insane," she shrieked, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet dining room. "She can't just abandon us with this." Matthew remained perfectly composed. The host removed her payment method before settlement. "The outstanding balance is 9,486 credits. Chloe stared at him, aghast. "I'm the host," she insisted. Matthew simply opened his tablet. The contract, deposit receipt, menu approvals, and card authorization are all in Isabella Thorne's name. A murmur moved around the table. "I thought Chloe paid," one relative whispered. "That's what she told us," another added. Chloe's head snapped toward them, her face already turning a deep, furious red. I coordinated everything, she declared, her voice cracking. Matthew scrolled once on his tablet. The event file shows that Ms. Thorne coordinated the reservation. It also shows several upgrade requests from your email that were denied because you were not financially authorized. Chloe's face burned. Helen looked from Matthew to me, as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Isabella, come back inside, she pleaded, her voice soft and strained. We can discuss this privately. You were comfortable humiliating me publicly, I replied, my gaze steady on my mother. Why should the truth require privacy? What would you have done in that moment? Would you have gone back inside, or would you have stood your ground? Let me know in the comments below. That was when my grandfather, Arthur, slowly removed his glasses and set them on the table. He had been quiet all evening, but his silence was nothing like Robert's. He was watching, measuring, remembering. Before anyone asks Isabella for another thing, he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a razor, Chloe should explain why she collected money from several of us for a dinner Isabella already paid for. Chloe froze. I did too. I had known she was taking credit, of course. That was a familiar sting. But I had not known she had taken contributions. Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and placed his phone beside the bill. On the screen was a message from Chloe. Send me your share by Friday. I'm covering the party, but every little bit helps. Below it, a transfer receipt for 500 credits. My aunt checked her own phone. Then my cousin did the same. Within seconds, 4 relatives had found payments totaling more than 2,000 credits. The room was no longer looking at me. Every eye had turned toward Chloe. She stared at the transfer receipts as if they had appeared by magic, conjured by some dark spell. That money was for extras, she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. Flowers, transportation, tips, things Isabella probably forgot. Matthew, ever composed, turned his tablet so the nearest relatives could see the itemized contract. Transportation was paid directly by Ms. Thorne. The floral invoice is included in the venue total. Gratuity is also included. My aunt asked Chloe where her 300 credits had gone. My cousin asked the same about his 200. Chloe's answers collided with each other, a desperate scramble for words. First, she said the money was still in her account. Then she claimed she had spent it on a surprise. Then she insisted everyone had misunderstood her message, her voice growing shrill with panic. Arthur lifted one hand, and the questions stopped. His gaze was unwavering, fixed solely on Chloe. There is nothing unclear about, send me your share, he said, his voice quiet but devastating. You allowed this family to believe you financed the evening. You insulted the person who actually did, and you collected money on top of it. Chloe's panic turned to a desperate rage, and she spun toward me. Isabella set this up, she cried, her voice cracking. She knew exactly how this would look. I almost admired the speed with which she tried to make my boundary into her conspiracy. I didn't know about the transfers, I said, my voice steady. But I do know you told the hotel you were authorized to add charges. Matthew nodded, then added, there is one more matter. He opened an email chain and read the subject line, birthday presentation revision. Chloe had contacted the venue that afternoon and requested a new cake plaque reading, with love from Chloe and the family. She had also asked the photographer to place her beside Helen for every formal picture and instructed the staff not to mention my name during the toast. The final line of her email chilled me to my core. Isabella prefers to stay out of the spotlight. I felt something inside me go utterly still. Chloe hadn't simply accepted mistaken praise. She had meticulously designed my disappearance. My mother, Helen, read the email twice, her face pale. You told me Isabella didn't want to be involved, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Chloe's mouth opened, but no answer came. Helen looked at me, a deep confusion clouding her eyes. Is that why you didn't give the birthday speech? Chloe told me you wanted her to do it, I replied, my voice flat. She told me you thought I made events too much about myself. Helen's face tightened, a mask of dawning realization. Robert finally returned to the table, no longer able to hide behind a bottle label. His voice was grim, devoid of its earlier evasion. Chloe, pay the bill, he said. The directness of his tone surprised everyone. Chloe laughed once, a brittle, hollow sound. With what? I didn't agree to 9,000 credits. Neither did the relatives who sent you money under false pretenses, Arthur retorted, his patience clearly gone. Yet you accepted theirs. Chloe pulled a credit card from her purse and handed it to Matthew with a flourish, a desperate attempt to restore some semblance of control. Fine. Charge it. Then everyone can stop acting like I committed some unforgivable crime. Matthew took the card to the terminal. We waited. The machine beeped. He tried again, then returned, his face impassive, and quietly said the transaction had been declined. Chloe's face went from red to gray. She offered a second card. That one was declined too. No one laughed. Their silence was worse. It stripped away the image Chloe had spent years polishing, the successful daughter, the generous organizer, the person who always knew better. Helen looked utterly devastated, but for once, she did not rush to protect her. You told me you had paid for the venue, Helen said, her voice trembling. You let me thank you in front of everyone. Chloe's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained sharp, venomous. I was going to make it work. Isabella always has money. She enjoys rescuing everyone. That sentence ended whatever sympathy remained in the room. I stepped back through the glass doors and returned to the edge of the table, not to rescue them, but because I wanted Chloe to hear me clearly, to feel the weight of my words. I did enjoy helping, I said, my voice low and steady. What I did not enjoy was being erased while you spent my money as evidence of your generosity. Chloe whispered, her voice barely a breath, You're really going to leave Mom with this bill? I looked at Helen, then back at Chloe. No. Chloe's. She claimed the dinner, accepted the credit, collected the contributions, and told me not to eat. Ownership comes with a price. Arthur asked Matthew to separate the charges Chloe had requested from the original package. Matthew explained that the party could settle the bill using multiple cards. Robert paid a portion. Helen used money from a savings account. Several relatives applied their earlier contributions only after Chloe transferred them back. I watched as Chloe stood at the table, making repayment after repayment, while everyone watched the balance in her account fall. She had to borrow the final amount from Robert, who told her it would be documented and repaid monthly. The dinner continued only because the venue had already served most of the food, but the celebration was over. No one asked Chloe to make the toast. The photographer removed her requested shot list. The cake plaque was replaced with the original message I had approved, Happy 60th, Mom. When Matthew offered me a slice, I declined. I had lost 2,000 credits, yes, but I had gained something I had never been able to buy. A clean answer. They had not failed to recognize my effort because I had explained it poorly. They had failed because my silence was convenient for them. As I left for the second time, Helen followed me into the lobby, her face etched with despair. Please don't let this destroy the family, she pleaded, her voice cracking. I turned to her and asked the question I had avoided my entire life, the burning question that had festered in my soul for decades. Why is the family only considered destroyed when I stop accepting the damage? She had no answer. I went home alone, but for the first time, I did not feel abandoned. I felt finished. The messages began before I even reached my apartment. Robert wrote, Your mother is crying. Chloe wrote, You humiliated me on purpose. Helen called 6 times, then sent a voice message asking me to come back and end the night with Chloe. The wording would have been funny if I had not heard the accusation beneath it. They still believed peace was something I produced by swallowing the truth. I turned off my phone and slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I found 37 messages in the family group chat. Chloe had posted a long explanation claiming she had collected contributions because she intended to reimburse me later. Arthur replied with one sentence, Then show the transfer you plan to make. She did not answer. My aunt asked why Chloe had changed the cake plaque. My cousin shared a screenshot of Chloe telling him, Isabella barely helped, so I'm covering almost everything. Helen asked everyone to stop discussing private matters in the group. Arthur wrote, The deception happened in this group. The correction belongs here too. I did not add anything. For once, the facts were working without my labor. On Monday, Chloe came to my office lobby without an appointment. She wore sunglasses, shielding her eyes from the world, and clutched a thick envelope as if it contained a secret. I met her downstairs, not wanting her proximity to pollute my professional space, not wanting my colleagues to witness the messy, undignified unraveling of my family. She pushed the envelope toward me, the crinkle of the paper oddly loud in the hushed lobby. Inside, I saw it. A check for 2,000 credits, the exact amount of my lost deposit. There, she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. Now we're even. I picked up the check, my fingers brushing against the crisp paper, then handed it back. We're not even, Chloe, I said, my gaze steady on her, unwavering. Money is the easiest part. She ripped off her sunglasses, her eyes tired, bloodshot, but her anger, that familiar, simmering rage, was still intact. "What else do you want?" she spat, a bitter edge to her voice. "An audience? A public execution?" I met her stare. "I want a public correction," I told her, my voice clear and firm. "Tell the family I planned and funded the dinner. Tell them you collected money while claiming you were paying. Return every single contribution. Reimburse Robert for the amount he covered, and, most importantly, stop speaking for me." She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, as though I had asked for something truly monstrous, something beyond her comprehension. "You want me to destroy my reputation?" she whispered, the anger replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. "No," I countered, leaning in slightly. "I want you to stop using mine to protect yours." Her voice dropped, a manipulative whisper. "Helen will never forgive you for this, Isabella." That was the moment it clicked. The final piece of the puzzle slid into place. She hadn't come to apologize. She hadn't come to make amends. She had come to restore the old arrangement, to offer a token payment, expecting me to accept the blame for the conflict, for the disruption, and then for everyone to simply move on without changing a thing. Without her changing a thing. I slipped the check back into the envelope, placed it gently in her hand, and said, "Then Helen can make her own choice." Chloe left without another word, the click of the lobby door echoing the finality of our exchange. 2 days later, Helen asked me to attend a family meeting at my parents' house. I agreed, but only under one condition: nobody would ask me to apologize for leaving the dinner. When I arrived, Arthur was already there, a formidable folder resting on his lap. Robert sat beside Helen, looking 10 years older, the lines on his face etched deeper, heavier. Chloe took the chair directly across from me, her posture rigid, defiant. Helen began with her usual speech, the familiar cadence of sisterhood, misunderstandings, and how one painful night shouldn't erase a lifetime of love. I listened, my heart a stone in my chest, until she said, "Isabella, you could have handled it privately." My patience, already worn thin, snapped. "I tried private for years, Helen," I replied, my voice calm but unwavering. "Every time Chloe took credit, insulted me, or changed the story, you told me to let it go. You told me it wasn't worth the fight." Privacy did not solve the problem. It protected it. It protected her. Robert looked at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. Helen started to defend herself, to argue, but Arthur, with a slow, deliberate movement, opened his folder. Inside were printed copies of the venue emails, the transfer messages, and then, to my surprise, several older group chats. One was from my college graduation, a conversation where Chloe had told relatives she paid for my celebration. I had paid for it myself. Another was from a holiday trip, where she had claimed I canceled at the last minute. In reality, Chloe had given me the wrong departure date, then used my absence to call me unreliable. Arthur had asked family members to send him examples, and the pattern, the calculated, deliberate pattern, filled 23 pages. Chloe's face changed with each turning page. Her bravado crumbled, replaced by a dawning horror. This was no longer just one dinner she could dismiss as a misunderstanding or confusion. This was a history. A long, carefully documented history of manipulation and deceit. Robert finally spoke, his voice raspy, thick with regret. "I knew some of this," he admitted, his eyes still fixed on the floor, as if looking up would shatter something irrevocably. "Not the money, not the way she was collecting contributions, but the way you two were treated differently." I stayed quiet because every confrontation became exhausting. It just felt easier to let it go. I looked at him, truly looked at my father, and the words, though they hurt, had to be said. "Your silence was a decision, Robert," I told him, the truth hanging heavy in the air. It just made Chloe's life easier and mine harder. He nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. Helen began to cry, soft, desperate sobs, but I did not move to comfort her. That was another role I had performed automatically, a reflex I was finally breaking. Chloe, her voice barely a whisper, broken and unsure, asked, "So, what happens now?" Arthur answered before I could, his voice firm, unwavering. "You repay what you owe. You correct the lies. And until trust is rebuilt, you will not manage family money, reservations, group gifts, or events." Helen looked startled, as if the ground beneath her had shifted again. Chloe looked absolutely furious, her face a mask of disbelief. For years, organizing family occasions had been her throne, her domain, the source of her self-proclaimed power. Losing that role, I realized, hurt her far more deeply than the humiliation of her declined cards. Robert agreed, his head bowed. Then Helen, after a long, agonizing silence, agreed too. Chloe looked at me, a silent plea in her eyes, waiting for me to soften the consequence, to intercede, to rescue her one last time. I did not. Revenge, I realized with a profound clarity, was not the moment her card failed at Ocean View Hall. It was this moment. The moment the family stopped asking me to protect her from the truth. Chloe waited 4 days before posting the correction to the family group chat. It was not graceful. She wrote that emotions had been high, communication had failed, and certain assumptions had been made about the party. It was a thinly veiled attempt to mitigate the damage, to minimize her culpability. Arthur, however, replied privately to her, I later learned, and whatever he said, it must have been effective. She deleted the post and tried again. The second version was shorter, starker, and brutally honest. It read, Isabella planned the dinner, paid the deposit, authorized the reservation, selected the menu, arranged transportation, and approved the decorations. I falsely allowed everyone to believe I was the host. I also collected contributions without telling her and used her silence to make myself look generous. What I said at the table was cruel and untrue. I am returning the money and repaying what others covered. I read it twice, waiting for the familiar, insidious urge to reassure her, to soften the blow, to make her feel better. It never came. Relatives responded with restrained messages. Nobody attacked her, nobody piled on, but nobody rushed to erase the consequences, either. My aunt asked for repayment by Friday. My cousin said he needed space. Robert, ever practical, created a written schedule for the money Chloe owed him. Helen, in a surprising display of decisive action, removed Chloe from the family event account and gave all the records to an outside bookkeeper, something she should have done years earlier. The punishment was not dramatic, I thought, but it was complete. Chloe lost control of the story, the money, and the role that had made her feel untouchable. A week later, Helen came to my apartment alone. She carried the blue and silver birthday cake topper Matthew had saved for me after the dinner, a small, fragile symbol of what had been almost lost. She set it gently on my kitchen counter and said, her voice soft, I owe you an apology without asking you to make me feel better. That was the first promising sentence she had spoken to me in a lifetime. She admitted that she had favored Chloe, not because she loved her more, but because Chloe demanded attention, while I, in my quiet confidence, seemed capable of taking care of myself. You made competence look easy, she said, her eyes welling up. I treated that as permission to give you less. I told her that competence was not the absence of need. I had needed her to defend me. I had needed her to ask one question before believing Chloe. I had needed her not to smile when I was humiliated in front of our entire family. Helen cried quietly, the tears falling freely now. This time, I handed her a tissue, but I did not tell her everything was fine. I love you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. But that does not mean we returned to normal. Normal is what hurt me. We agreed to meet once a week for coffee, just the two of us, and to stop using family gatherings as a shortcut for real repair. Robert called separately and apologized for treating avoidance as neutrality. I told him the same thing I had told him in the lobby of Ocean View Hall. Silence chooses a side when only one person benefits from it. He began attending counseling with Helen, which, in a way, mattered more to me than any speech he could have given. Chloe did not contact me for nearly a month. During that silence, that strange, unsettling quiet, I received an email from Matthew at the hotel. He attached a final document I had never seen. A proposed toast Chloe had sent to the event staff. In it, she planned to thank Helen for teaching her that the people who truly contribute never need recognition, then announced that she had personally saved the party after I became too busy with work. The cruelty was deliberate, polished, and scheduled to be delivered between the main course and dessert. It was a dagger, sharpened and ready to strike. I forwarded the document to Arthur, Helen, and Robert with no commentary, no explanation, just the raw, undeniable evidence. Helen called Chloe immediately. I did not hear the conversation, but I learned later that Helen canceled a planned weekend trip with her and told her they would not resume their usual closeness until Chloe addressed the pattern honestly. That was the loss Chloe had feared most. She was no longer the protected daughter whose motives were automatically trusted, the one whose narrative was always accepted without question. Her shield had finally fallen. Her shield had finally fallen, and the true cost of her deception was finally coming due. When Chloe finally asked to meet, it wasn't a tearful phone call or a desperate plea. It was a carefully worded message, suggesting a public cafe, a neutral ground. I agreed. She arrived without an envelope, without the sunglasses she'd worn when she tried to pay me off, and without a single excuse. Her shoulders were slumped, and the usual sharp glint in her eyes was dimmed. I read the toast again, she said, her voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the booming pronouncements I was used to. I don't recognize the person who wrote it. I looked at her, truly looked at her, for a long moment. I do, I replied, my voice steady, uncompromising. I have known her for years. She winced, a flicker of the old Chloe, but this time, she didn't argue. She didn't try to deflect or twist my words. The silence stretched, heavy with all the unspoken history between us. Then, she took a deep breath, and the words tumbled out, hesitant but real. She admitted that my promotion, my success, had triggered something dark and ugly inside her. She confessed she'd been struggling financially, feeling adrift, and had built her entire identity around being the impressive one, the successful daughter, the generous organizer. Instead of admitting her fear, her insecurity, she had tried to diminish me, to make me smaller so she could feel bigger. I thought if everyone saw you as selfish, I would still look valuable, she said, her gaze fixed on the table between us. It was a brutal honesty I had never expected, a window into the twisted logic that had governed her actions for so long. I held her gaze, my own emotions a complex tangle of anger, weariness, and a sliver of something akin to understanding. Are you sorry for hurting me? I asked, my voice low, or are you just sorry the plan failed? She took a long, agonizing moment to answer. The seconds stretched into an eternity, each one punctuated by the clatter of coffee cups and the murmur of distant conversations. Finally, she met my eyes again. Both, she said, the single word carrying more weight than any elaborate apology. It wasn't the perfect answer, no, but it was honest. And after years of carefully constructed lies, honesty felt like a profound shift. I took a sip of my own coffee, the warmth doing little to thaw the icy reserve around my heart. I'm not ready to forgive you, I told her, my voice clear and unwavering. And I might never trust you with money or my reputation again. She nodded, her shoulders slumping further. There was no argument, no attempt to guilt-trip me. Just acceptance. What can I do? She asked, her voice raw. Change when nobody is watching, I said, the words coming from a place of deep, hard-won clarity. And stop expecting access to me as proof that you've changed. We left separately that day. There was no hug, no manufactured moment of reconciliation, no swell of triumphant music. There was no instant healing, no magical erasure of years of pain. And in a strange way, that made the moment more real, more substantial, than every hollow family promise we had ever made before. The family never truly returned to the old version of normal. Chloe was no longer treated as the automatic leader, the one whose word was gospel. Robert, to his credit, no longer disappeared into the background when conversations became uncomfortable. Helen, a changed woman in many ways, actually checked facts before rushing to defend anyone. And me? I stopped funding celebrations to earn affection. I stopped accepting jokes that were really thinly veiled insults. And most importantly, I stopped explaining my boundaries to people who were clearly committed to misunderstanding them. Some relatives, the ones still clinging to the old ways, called me colder. Arthur, ever the quiet observer, called me clearer. He was right. Clarity did not make me cruel. It simply ended the long, painful tradition of treating my hurt as the acceptable price for everyone else's comfort. 6 months later, Helen invited me to a small family dinner. The location? The very same hotel, Ocean View Hall, where everything had imploded. My first instinct was to refuse. The thought of stepping back into that place, with all its lingering ghosts, sent a shiver down my spine. But then, she sent the reservation confirmation, the paid receipt, and a guest list with no surprises, no last-minute additions from Chloe. You do not need to organize anything, her message read, simple and direct. You only need to decide whether you want to come. That distinction, that clear boundary mattered. So I accepted. When I arrived, Chloe was already seated, a quieter, more subdued presence than I had ever known. She hadn't touched the place cards, the menu, or the non-existent photographer schedule, because there was no photographer. The dinner was simple, fully paid, and intentionally ordinary. Helen had arranged it herself, with Robert's quiet support, taking full ownership. Arthur sat at the head of the table, his eyes scanning everyone, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. It was the smile of a man who knew that progress, true progress, was often less impressive than performance, but infinitely more valuable. Chloe greeted me politely. There was no attempt at a dramatic, public apology, no grand gesture. Over the previous months, she had quietly repaid every relative, completed 3 payments to Robert, and, as Helen had occasionally mentioned, had stopped managing family events altogether. She had also, I knew, begun meeting with a therapist. These were not things Chloe had used to bargain for forgiveness, and that difference mattered too. During the main course, a serving dish was placed between Chloe and me. For one suspended second, a single, agonizing beat of time, I remembered her manicured finger tapping the spoon, her voice dripping with venom, telling me not to fill my plate. Chloe remembered as well. I saw it in the sudden catch of her breath, the slight tightening around her eyes. Without a word, she moved the dish toward me, her hand trembling slightly, and said, her voice soft, "You first." It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible to anyone else at the table. I did not mistake it for transformation. I didn't believe it erased years of hurt. But I accepted it. I reached for the spoon, and I filled my plate without apology, without explanation, savoring the simple act of taking what was rightfully mine. Later, Helen stood to make a toast. She thanked Robert for helping with the dinner, Arthur for insisting on honesty, and even Chloe for taking responsibility. Then she looked directly at me, her eyes filled with a new kind of light, a vulnerability I had rarely seen. "I used to praise Isabella Thorne for being strong," she said, her voice clear and resonant in the quiet room, when what I really meant was that I expected her to survive without support. I was wrong. Her generosity was never an obligation, and her boundaries are not a punishment. The room remained quiet, every eye on Helen, then on me. But this silence, unlike the one at the last dinner, did not erase me. It made space. It made space for the truth, for the new understanding that was slowly, painstakingly being built. Helen did not ask me to respond. She simply raised her glass. That restraint, that respect for my silence, was perhaps the most profound part of her apology. After dinner, Chloe found me standing near the lobby windows, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. "I know we're not fixed," she said, her voice quiet, almost reflective. "I also know I spent years making you smaller because I was afraid of feeling small myself." Understanding the reason, I told her, my voice gentle but firm, "doesn't remove the damage." "I know," she said, her gaze steady. "I'm going to keep doing the work anyway." I believed she meant it in that moment. I truly did. But I also knew that belief, powerful as it was, did not require immediate trust. We walked back to the table separately, a quiet understanding passing between us. There was no grand reunion, no instant healing. Just 2 sisters, a new path ahead, and the quiet, persistent hum of repair. The family never truly returned to the old version of normal. Chloe was no longer treated as the automatic leader. Robert no longer disappeared when conversations became uncomfortable. Helen checked facts before defending anyone. And me? I stopped funding celebrations to earn affection. I stopped accepting jokes that were really insults. I stopped explaining boundaries to people committed to misunderstanding them. Some relatives called me colder. Arthur called me clearer. And he was right. Clarity did not make me cruel. It ended the tradition of treating my pain as the price of everyone else's comfort. The night Chloe told me not to eat because I hadn't contributed a penny, she expected me to defend the cost of my plate. Instead, I stopped paying for the entire illusion. The bill exposed her lies, yes, but the real consequence was so much larger. She lost the protection that had allowed those lies to thrive for so long. I didn't get revenge by ruining her life. I got it by refusing to let her build her life on my silence. Forgiveness, if it came, would be earned slowly, privately, and not on her terms. Respect came first. And every time I remember walking out of Ocean View Hall in that red coat, I no longer think about the money I lost. I think about the part of myself I finally stopped giving away. So, tell me honestly, if someone in your own family took credit for your sacrifices, humiliated you in public, and expected you to keep paying for the privilege, would you forgive them once they apologized? Or would you make them prove they had changed before letting them back into your life? Share your take in the comments below. That restraint, that respect for my silence, was perhaps the most profound part of her apology. A quiet hum filled the space as guests slowly returned to their conversations, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the expectant silence of a performance, but the comfortable murmur of people truly present. I saw Robert lean over and gently squeeze Helen's hand. Arthur, ever observant, caught my eye from across the table and offered a subtle, knowing nod. There was no need for grand pronouncements, no dramatic declarations of newfound peace. The shift was subtle, woven into the fabric of the evening, a gentle restitching of threads that had long been frayed. After dinner, as people mingled and prepared to leave, Chloe found me standing near the lobby windows, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. The reflection of my red dress shimmered faintly on the glass, a quiet echo of a night that had changed everything. "I know we're not fixed," she said, her voice quiet, almost reflective. There was no edge, no pretense, just a raw honesty that felt unfamiliar coming from her. "I also know I spent years making you smaller because I was afraid of feeling small myself. Afraid of being forgotten, I think. Afraid of not being enough, especially after your promotion." Her gaze dropped, tracing an invisible pattern on the marble floor. "It was easier to diminish you than to face my own insecurities." I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not the arrogant sister who had once tapped a serving spoon with a manicured finger, but a woman finally confronting the architects of her own behavior. "Understanding the reason," I told her, my voice gentle but firm, "doesn't remove the damage, Chloe. It doesn't erase the years of being unseen, unheard, or intentionally undermined." She met my gaze, a flicker of something in her eyes, not anger, not defiance, but a quiet acceptance. "I know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm going to keep doing the work anyway. For myself, for Mom, for us." I believed she meant it in that moment. I truly did. But I also knew that belief, powerful as it was, did not require immediate trust. Trust was a garden that had been trampled and would need more than just one rain shower to bloom again. We walked back to the table separately, a quiet understanding passing between us, an unspoken acknowledgement of the long, winding road ahead. There was no grand reunion, no instant healing. Just two sisters, a new path ahead, and the quiet, persistent hum of repair. The family never truly returned to the old version of normal. That normal, I now understood, had been built on uneven foundations, on silences and suppressed truths. Chloe was no longer treated as the automatic leader, the one whose word was law. She still contributed to family plans, but now her suggestions were met with thoughtful consideration, sometimes even polite questioning, rather than automatic deference. Robert no longer disappeared when conversations became uncomfortable. He learned to stay, to listen, to engage, even when it meant facing uncomfortable truths about his own past inaction. Helen, perhaps the most dramatically altered, had installed a new firewall of skepticism. She checked facts before defending anyone, a habit that, while initially jarring, ultimately created a more equitable space for everyone. And me? I stopped funding celebrations to earn affection. The quiet joy of a shared meal, a sincere conversation, a genuine compliment, now felt more valuable than any extravagant gesture I could purchase. I stopped accepting jokes that were really insults, learned to gently, but firmly, redirect the narrative. And most importantly, I stopped explaining boundaries to people committed to misunderstanding them. My boundaries became statements, not negotiations. Some relatives, accustomed to the old dynamics, called me colder, less approachable. They mourned the version of me who absorbed every slight with a quiet smile, the Isabella Thorne who made things easy for everyone else. But Arthur, with his calm wisdom, called me clearer. And he was right. Clarity did not make me cruel. It ended the tradition of treating my pain as the price of everyone else's comfort. It allowed me to exist fully, authentically, without constantly sacrificing pieces of myself to maintain a fragile illusion of harmony. The night Chloe told me not to eat because I hadn't contributed a penny, she expected me to defend the cost of my plate, to prove my worth. Instead, I stopped paying for the entire illusion. The bill exposed her lies, yes, but the real consequence was so much larger. She lost the protection that had allowed those lies to thrive for so long, the unspoken agreement that my silence would always be her shield. I didn't get revenge by ruining her life, by tearing her down. I got it by refusing to let her build her life on my silence. My victory wasn't her downfall, it was my liberation. Forgiveness, if it came, would be earned slowly, privately, and not on her terms. Respect came first. And every time I remember walking out of Ocean View Hall in that red coat, the crisp fabric billowing around me as I stepped into the cool night air, I no longer think about the $2,000 I lost. I think about the part of myself I finally stopped giving away. The piece of me I reclaimed, one deliberate step at a time. So, tell me honestly, if someone in your own family took credit for your sacrifices, humiliated you in public, and expected you to keep paying for the privilege, would you forgive them once they apologized? Or would you make them prove they had changed before letting them back into your life? Share your take in the comments below.